The Millionaire's Hidden Past, a journey back to his true mother. It was an autumn morning when Richard Caldwell, a man known throughout the country as one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs of his time, woke up in his glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city skyline. His life seemed flawless: money, power, prestige, and the admiration of the world. He had built empires, created opportunities for thousands, and was admired as a symbol of success. Yet within him there was an emptiness he had never been able to explain. Richard had grown up in a mansion, surrounded by everything money could buy. His childhood memories, however, were always strange. While his parents gave him all the material luxuries imaginable, they were cold and distant, always more concerned about maintaining appearances than giving him affection. Sometimes, late at night, he would hear hushed arguments between them, always stopping abruptly when he entered the room. Questions about his birth were always brushed aside with vague responses. One day, in his mid-40s, Richard received a letter from a dying woman who had once worked as a maid in his childhood home. Her handwriting was shaky, her words filled with desperation. She revealed the truth that would change his life forever. Richard was not the biological son of the Caldwells. He had been kidnapped as a baby from a poor woman who lived in the outskirts of the city. The wealthy couple, unable to have children, had arranged for his abduction to raise him as their own. The maid had carried this dark secret for decades, but guilt had consumed her, and before her last breath, she decided to confess. Richard felt the ground vanish beneath him. His entire life, his very identity, was built on a lie. The parents he had honored were, in truth, his captors. For days, he locked himself away, torn between disbelief and the undeniable truth in that trembling letter. With every sentence, fragments of his childhood began to make sense: the lack of warmth, the hushed tones, the unexplained fear whenever he asked about his past. The letter mentioned the name of his real mother, Elena Marquez. She had been a young woman struggling to raise her newborn son alone after his father abandoned them. She lived in a small shack, worked odd jobs, and dreamed of giving her baby boy a life filled with love, even if poverty was their constant companion. Then one day her baby was gone. Elena searched everywhere, begged the authorities, and cried to the heavens, but no one listened to a poor woman with no influence. She lived decades with a wound that never healed, believing she would never see her son again. For Richard, the revelation became an obsession. He no longer cared about his corporations, his reputation, or his billions. He needed to find her, the woman who had given him life, the mother who had been denied the chance to raise him. The search was long and arduous. Private investigators combed through old records, faded police reports, and testimonies from forgotten neighbors. Weeks turned into months, and Richard grew restless, driven by a desperation he had never felt before. Money, for once, was not about power or prestige. It became the tool to undo a wrong, to reconnect two lives that fate had cruelly torn apart. Finally, the day came. A private investigator located Elena. She was living in a modest nursing home on the outskirts of the city, her hair silver, her body frail, yet her eyes still carried a spark of resilience. Richard could barely breathe as he stood at the threshold of her room. When he entered, Elena looked up. Her eyes widened and her lips trembled. Something inside her recognized him instantly. Though decades had passed, though her baby was now a man, a mother's heart never forgets. "Richard," she whispered, her voice breaking. He knelt beside her bed, tears streaming down his face. "Mother, I found you." The embrace that followed seemed to dissolve the decades of pain. Richard held her with a desperation that words could never capture. For the first time in his life, he felt something he had always been searching for: pure, unconditional love. Elena wept in his arms, her heart finally healing after years of torment. From that day forward, Richard's life changed completely. He dedicated himself not to building more empires, but to giving his mother the life she had always deserved. He bought her a beautiful home with gardens she could walk through, filled it with warmth, laughter, and all the comforts she had been denied. But most importantly, he gave her his time, his presence, and his love. Every morning, they would sit together, sharing breakfast, laughing at stories, or simply enjoying each other's company. Eleanor would often place her wrinkled hand on his face and whisper, "You were always mine. No matter what they did, you were always my son." Richard discovered a new sense of peace. He no longer sought validation from the world, for he had found the one bond that completed him. He took Elena to the seaside, fulfilling her childhood dream of seeing the ocean's vastness. He arranged reunions with relatives she had lost touch with, helping her feel the family she thought she had lost forever. But beyond giving her joy, Richard also sought justice. He revealed the truth publicly, exposing the crime that had been hidden for decades. Though his adoptive parents had long since passed away, their legacy crumbled under the weight of the revelation. Richard did not do it out of vengeance, but to honor the truth, to stand by the woman who had suffered in silence for so long. Their story touched millions. People around the world admired the millionaire who abandoned his empire's cold pursuits to cherish his poor mother, proving that love was the greatest wealth a man could possess. As years passed, Elena's health declined, but she never left Richard's side. On her last day, she looked into his eyes with a serenity he had never seen before. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. "Now I can go in peace, knowing I held my son again." Richard wept, holding her hand until her final breath. Though grief consumed him, he felt gratitude above all else. He had been given the chance to know his true mother, to give back the love she had carried in her heart since the day he was born. After her passing, Richard established a foundation in her name, dedicated to helping impoverished mothers and children torn apart by injustice. It became his life's mission, not to build empires of steel and glass, but to build bridges of love and compassion for those who needed it most. In the end, Richard Caldwell, the millionaire who once had everything but nothing at the same time, found the greatest treasure of all, the embrace of his true mother, the love he had been searching for his entire life. And through that love, he finally understood the meaning of happiness. After Elena's passing, Richard Caldwell felt an emptiness he had not expected. Though he had spent years building their bond and fulfilling her dreams, losing her left a silence in his life that no amount of wealth could fill. Yet he carried her lessons and love as a guiding force, reminding him that the meaning of life extended far beyond boardrooms and bank accounts. Richard's grief slowly transformed into determination. He decided that Elena's legacy would not end with her death. He founded the Marquez Foundation. Dedicated to supporting single mothers and children in poverty, ensuring they had access to education, healthcare, and safety, things Elena had longed to give him but had lacked the resources to provide. The foundation became his life's mission. Richard traveled to remote villages and urban neighborhoods, personally witnessing the struggles of families. He used his influence to create programs for housing, scholarships, and job training. Each time he saw a child smile, he felt Elena's presence, whispering that he was on the right path. Despite his philanthropic focus, Richard never abandoned his personal reflections. He often visited the small home where Elena had lived before she was forced to part with him. He would sit in the garden, now blooming with flowers he had planted in her memory, thinking of the hardships she endured and the strength she had shown. It reminded him that life was fragile and love must be shared before it's too late. Over time, Richard encountered stories of other families torn apart by deception or greed, mirroring his own early life. One by one, he reached out to them, helping to reunite parents and children whenever possible. His actions inspired a ripple effect. Others, in his social and business circles, began to contribute to the cause, forming a network of compassion fueled by his example. Yet not all moments were smooth. Some wealthy individuals resisted his efforts, seeing his compassion as a threat to the status quo. Richard faced lawsuits, attempts to discredit him, and relentless scrutiny from the media. But he remembered Elena's words, "Do what is right, even when it's hard, and love will always guide you." These words became his mantra, allowing him to persevere through the challenges. Through the years, Richard also discovered a profound sense of self. He realized that the fortune he had inherited as a child could now be used for justice, healing, and hope. He would attend conferences, speak to world leaders, and advocate for vulnerable communities, always carrying Elena's name with pride. In quiet moments, he would often look at the sky and imagine Elena's smile. He knew she was watching over him, proud of the man he had become, not the man the Caldwells had raised, but the man he chose to be, compassionate, empathetic, and unwaveringly devoted to doing good in the world. Richard's journey became a story told far and wide. He was no longer just the millionaire of headlines. He became a symbol of redemption and humanity. He had learned that wealth was meaningless without purpose, that family could be chosen or rediscovered, and that love, pure, unconditional, and selfless, was the greatest treasure anyone could possess. And in the hearts of those he touched, from the poorest villages to the bustling city streets, Richard Caldwell's legacy was immortalized, not for the billions he had amassed, but for the lives he had healed, the mothers he had comforted, and the love he had carried forward, honoring the mother who had given him life and never gave up hope. In the end, the millionaire who had been kidnapped as a child and torn from his mother became a man who returned the world to its better self, one act of love at a time, proving that the most powerful inheritance is not money, but the ability to give and receive love.